this video, we will focus on the TungSol 6550 tube. We will look at all the different variations and iterations of this tube. Now, if you're interested in a primer, sort of an introduction to the various manufacturers and styles of the vintage 6550 tube, you can check out my other video. I've done that in that video. Going back to TungSol, as you may be aware, TungSol launched the 6550 tube in mid-50s, 1954, 1955 timeframe. They came out with this iconic tube. I say iconic because it paved the way for the amazing and iconic tube amps from the 50s and 60s, such as the McIntosh MC60, MC75, MC275, the Harman Citation 2, Dynaco Mark III, and many other amps. Those amps were able to use two of these 6550 tubes per channel to deliver more than 100 watts, and it was sort of the golden era of tube amps, and these tubes enabled that. So TungSol, 1950s is when they came out with this, and they had a production from mid-1950s to about mid-70s. That's when they closed their shop. So they had a run of about 20 years. And during that time, they had multiple versions and iterations of the 6550 tube. And hopefully in this video, you'll get to see all of them. So starting with the first one, this very first version had a solid black plate and did not have any getters on the side. All the getters are up on the top here. On this particular tube, you can't see any getters, but in some cases, when the getter flashing is uneven, you can peek through and see that there are 3 D getters up on the top here. And that's how you can tell the very first iteration of the TungSol tube. Now, my friend Scott and I have come up with a versioning system for these tubes that we find helpful, and I'll continue to refer to that, and hopefully it's helpful to you too. So we have divided the black plates and the gray plates into version 1 and version 2, and then we use the dot versioning for each. You'll see it as I go on. So this would be a 1.1. Version 1, black plate, dot 1, which is the first iteration of the black plate. So that's all there is to this tube in terms of the plate structure. Solid black plate, no getters on the side, all the getters up on the top. There's 3 D getters up on the top there. The other way is to obviously look at the dates if available. As you may know, the date code on TungSols is fairly straightforward when available. It always starts with a 322. That's a manufacturer code. 322 is TungSol, usually followed by 4 digits for a year and week of the year. In this case, it says 322-5736. So this was manufactured in 1957 at the 36th week of 1957. Now, it's my understanding that some of the very early tubes from maybe 55, 56 only had 1 digit for the year, followed by 2 digits for the week. So in some cases, you may see that it may have a 322 followed by 3 digits. And that just means it's either a 55 or a 56, most likely. So this is a 5736. And in my understanding, this particular iteration, 1.1, was manufactured all the way up until 58. So we got about almost 3 to 4 years of this tube, 55, 56, 57, 58. We still saw version 1.1, solid black plate with top getters. So now let's look at the next version of this tube, and that came in form of this tube here. And the change was still black plate. So this is still a version 1. We call this a version 1.2, black plate iteration 2. And what we notice is the change here is they moved 2 of the top D getters on the side here. As you can see, there's 2 D getters on the side, but one of the D getters stayed up here. As you can see, there it is. So the configuration of the getters changed, and 2 of them move to the side. 1 D-getter up on the top, 2 on the side, solid black plate. This would be version 1.2. And this is when they also had this 2-letter date codes. Nobody really knows what these stand for and what they mean. However, this can only be found on tubes from 59 to 60, maybe even 61. So there was about a couple of years when they used this. And in some cases, there are proper date codes available for some of these iterations. That's how we were able to determine that these tubes, whether they preceded or succeeded a particular version. So 1.2, 2 D side getters, 1 top D getter, solid black plate. That was 1.2. And as you can see, this tube, I think to accommodate for maybe the side getters, the length of this tube is slightly taller than the 1.1. Now, moving on to the next iteration, we get this tube, which is still a black plate. So version 1, third iteration, so 1.3. 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. Solid black plate. And now we have moved to halo getters. You can see here on the side. 1, 2, and also we've moved from having both the getters on one side to having a getter on each side, and it switched the getters to halos. So 2 halo getters on each side, 1 halo getter up on the top. That's the design of this 1.3 tube. And this was in production again for a very short amount of time, most likely in 1960. So this probably went through 58, 59 and 59, 60. This one here, black plate, halo getters, 1 on each side and 1 on the top. 3 halo getters, 1 on top, 1 on each side. 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. And the next version, we get into gray plates. And the difference between these two is only 1. It goes from the black plate to gray plate. And the gray on the TungSol, by the way, is very dark gray. It's hard to tell whether it's black or gray unless you really know these tubes well. For example, I actually purchased what was supposed to be this 1.3 black plate halo getter tube from a gentleman who thought he had a black plate halo getter TungSol, and he bought it as a black plate halo getters. I bought it from him as a black plate, but only when I came across the other gray plates and black plates and I was able to put them next to each other, I realized TungSol gray is a very dark gray. Unless you really have a reference of a black plate, you're not going to be able to tell. So it was an honest mistake. The gentleman thought he had a black plate. When I got it, I also thought, well, that's a black plate. But only when I put it in contrast next to an actual black plate can you tell that, wow, this is just a slight shade of lighter black compared to this black here. So can be easily confused. But these tubes are quite rare. I think this one is a rare tube. They didn't make a lot of these, only maybe for 1 year. This one was probably in production in 1960, 61. So maybe at least 2 years, maybe even 62. I've seen dates on these. And again, you see the letter codes here. And in some cases, you are able to find date codes. That's how we're able to tell and date these. So starting with this one, we get into version 2. Version 1 are black plates, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. And version 2 is gray plate. So this is a 2.1, first version of the gray plate. And the only difference is the plate. Apart from that, it's got 2 halo getters on each side and 1 halo up on the top. So that's the only difference. Black plate, gray plate. Other than that, there's no difference between version 1.3 and version 2.1. And finally, we get to the last version of the TungSol, which is the most recognizable version of the TungSol 6550 tube, which is the gray plate 3-hole version. And this tube, we can see it as early as 1963. So as you can see, we went from 1955 to 1963 and had all of these variations. These two are gray plates, so version 2.1, version 2.2, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. Black plates, gray plates, solid, 3-hole, solid, solid, solid. And as far as getters are concerned, triple top D, one top D, two Ds on one side, triple halo, triple halo, triple halo, same structure, one on the top, one on each side. So those are primarily it. Those are all the different versions and iterations of the 6550 tube as I've come to understand and based on everything I've received. And I've been very fortunate to have experienced the quads of almost all of these tubes. I've listened to them, and I can tell you that in my system, on my speakers and my system, there is a difference in sound between these tubes. However, they all maintain a signature TungSol sound that I absolutely love. I have my preferences on these tubes, but then again, they're my preference on my system to my ears. I may prefer one tube over the other, and it may not be the same in your system and to your ears. So, but I must say that when I started with my McIntosh monoblocks, I started first with Russian tubes, and they sounded great to me. And I heard Chinese tubes. So these are reissues or new generation, new production tubes. And they absolutely sounded great, and I loved the sound. Only when I decided to try vintage, I started looking into the older tubes, and I thought they were very expensive, and I didn't know why. And for the most part, I attributed the availability, the rarity of these tubes to the price. So I thought it's just reflects the rarity. So, but when I got the tubes, and I obviously started with the cheaper of the vintage tubes, so I started actually with the GE 6550A because that seems to be more available and cheaper compared to the TungSols. And I was absolutely floored in terms of the sound difference between the new generation Russian and Chinese tube versus the GE 6550A tube. I couldn't believe the difference. And that really led me to consider even older tubes to see, does it reflect the price, the sound, and so on. And then I went on to the more affordable TungSol 6550, which is the gray plate 3-hole version. And I found easily a big difference between the GE 6550A and the TungSol 6550 tube. And then I just couldn't stop. I kept going and trying all the different versions, and I think I have a little bit of an OCD to blame, and at that point I wanted to try every single version out there to really find my sound, to see which tube I like, and that way I could settle down on one or two, and that's what I've done. And through this process, I've been very fortunate that I was able to experience all of these tubes, and all I can say is it's been audio bliss for me listening to these tubes on my McIntosh amps and my Tannoy GRF speakers and my McIntosh MX110. I think if I change any of these components, the sound may change, and I may decide to try some other tubes or prefer some other tubes. But overall, I found these TungSols to just be absolutely phenomenal. If you are a vintage tube denier in terms of sound quality, I would have to say that either you do not have a system that's resolving enough, or you just have the ears where you're not able to hear the differences, and that's totally fine. That doesn't mean there is nobody's right or wrong in this. It's at the end of the day, it's a personal preference. Your ears are not same as mine. Your system is not same as mine. And what you may hear, even with the same exact tubes that I prefer, may be very different. So I totally get that. Just wanted to make this video more objective in terms of the differences that we can see in the physical differences we see in the tubes. As far as subjective differences, that all depends on individual taste and preference, and of course how resolving the system is. So I hope I'm able to help show the differences of the various iterations and versions of the 6550 tube. My friends really insisted I make this video since I've had this opportunity to learn so much about these tubes and have experienced these tubes firsthand. Let me know if I got anything wrong, or if you have any questions, do post that in the comments and I'll try to reply. As far as the production of these goes, this was introduced in the 60s, and then the production went on all the way into 70s. So you can imagine, just in terms of volume, more of these 2.2s were produced and are available. Great tubes, all of them. And again, I have my preferences, and I'd rather not share that here, but they're different in the system. So anyway, thank you for watching the video. Hope you are able to learn something from it. Hope I've been helpful. Thanks.